My name is Juliana. I'm 34 years old, and I never thought I'd have to learn the true value of family the hard way. As a software engineer who clawed her way up from nothing, I spent years supporting my parents financially, paying their mortgage bills, and more. Then one night, my uncle accidentally sent me a video that shattered everything. My own father called me their perfect little cash cow, while laughing about how much money they were taking from me. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever discovered someone wasn't who you thought they were. Trust me, what happened next will show you why sometimes staying quiet is the most powerful move you can make. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where money was always tight. Our house was modest, a three-bedroom ranch with peeling paint and a perpetually broken front step that my father Richard always promised to fix next weekend. That next weekend stretched into years as he focused on his job as a factory foreman, working long hours at the local manufacturing plant. My mother Marie worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office, her schedule arranged around my school hours, so someone would always be home. Every financial decision in our household was calculated with precision. Grocery shopping involved meticulous coupon cutting and brand comparisons. Clothes came from thrift stores or discount racks, carefully selected to hide their secondhand nature from my classmates. The constant refrain in our house was, "We can't afford that," spoken with such regularity that I stopped asking for things by the time I was 10. The stress about money permeated everything. I remember lying awake at night overhearing heated whispers about overdue bills and borrowing from my mother's sister just until payday. The kitchen table was often covered with envelopes marked "Final Notice" in alarming red letters. During winter, we kept the thermostat so low that we wore sweaters indoors, and I learned to take 3-minute showers to save on the water bill. Despite providing financially, my father remained emotionally distant. He was a man of few words, expressing pride through a nod or a brief "good job," rather than physical affection or deeper conversation. His primary concern was whether my career choices would lead to financial stability. My mother was gentler, but followed his lead, rarely contradicting him even when she clearly disagreed. When I showed interest in art or writing, they would exchange looks of concern, steering me toward practical subjects like math and science. "Artists starve, Juliana," my father would say. "You need something reliable, something that pays the bills." The irony that I would later be paying their bills wasn't lost on me. Throughout my childhood, the one relative who seemed genuinely interested in me beyond my potential earning capacity was Uncle Jim, my father's younger brother. Unlike my father's stern pragmatism, Uncle Jim had a warmth that drew people to him. He would ask about my interests with genuine curiosity, listening intently to my answers, rather than waiting to insert practical advice. When I was 14, I became fascinated with computers after a career day presentation at school. The speaker, a woman in her 30s, described creating software that helped businesses solve real problems. She looked confident, independent, and nothing like the women I knew in our small town. I wanted to be just like her. Our family computer was an ancient desktop shared by everyone, primarily used for my father to track household expenses. To learn programming, I needed more access than the 20 minutes per day I was allotted. So I got a job at the local grocery store, bagging groceries after school and on weekends. For 6 months, I saved every penny eating lunch at home instead of the school cafeteria and walking 3 miles to work to avoid bus fare. When I finally had enough for a basic laptop, my parents questioned the purchase. "That's a lot of money to waste on a computer game," my father said, misunderstanding my intentions entirely. It was Uncle Jim who defended my choice, saying, "She's investing in her future, Richard. That's what you always taught her, right?" That laptop became my gateway to a new world. I taught myself basic programming languages using free online tutorials, staying up late into the night after finishing homework and household chores. By my senior year of high school, I had created several small applications and maintained a perfect GPA, earning a scholarship to the State University for Computer Science. College was another financial struggle. My scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses, books, or the newer computer I desperately needed for advanced programming courses. I juggled 3 part-time jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop, weekend work at the university library, and freelance website building for local businesses. I slept an average of 4 hours a night for 4 years straight, but I graduated at the top of my class. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, my father commenting that the degree should get you a decent job, while my mother smiled quietly beside him. Uncle Jim was the one who brought me flowers and took celebratory photos, his face beaming with genuine pride. "You're going to change the world, Jules," he said, using the nickname only he called me. I've always known it. And as I prepared to enter the workforce, I couldn't have imagined how dramatically the dynamics with my family were about to change, or how the foundation was being laid for years of exploitation that would culminate in that devastating video. My first job after college was at a mid-sized tech company in Columbus. The starting salary of $65,000 seemed enormous compared to my student budget, though it was modest by industry standards. Still, it was enough to rent a small one-bedroom apartment and begin paying off my student loans. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to check my bank account before every purchase. The tech world proved challenging in ways beyond the technical. As one of only 4 women in a department of 32 developers, I encountered skepticism about my abilities despite my qualifications. I compensated by working longer hours than anyone else, taking on the projects no one wanted, and solving problems others couldn't crack. My dedication paid off with a promotion to senior developer within 18 months, accompanied by a $15,000 raise. During this time, I called my parents weekly. Our conversations were brief, focused on practical matters rather than emotional connection. My father would ask about my salary and benefits package more often than my happiness or well-being. When I mentioned a challenging project I was proud of solving, he would interrupt to ask if it might lead to another raise. My mother showed more interest in my personal life, though she seemed confused by my career choices, and often suggested I should find a nice man to settle down with before getting too focused on work. Uncle Jim remained my most supportive family member. He called regularly just to chat, remembered details about my projects without prompting, and never asked about my finances unless I brought up the topic first. When I mentioned the difficulties of being a woman in tech, he listened without offering solutions or dismissing my concerns. "You're blazing a trail, Jules," he would say. "It's not supposed to be easy, but you're strong enough to handle it." Everything changed 3 years into my career when I received a call from my mother on a Tuesday evening. Her voice trembled as she explained that my father's factory was closing, outsourcing production to Mexico. After 30 years of service, he was being laid off with only 2 months' severance pay. The timing couldn't have been worse. My mother had recently been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, requiring expensive treatments not fully covered by their insurance. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage," she admitted, her voice small with shame. "The bank is threatening foreclosure." Without hesitation, I offered to help. By this time, I had been recruited by a prestigious tech firm in Cincinnati, with a significant salary increase. I had savings and few expenses of my own. "Send me the mortgage statement," I told her. "I'll take care of it this month while Dad looks for a new job." The relief in her voice was palpable. "You're such a blessing, Juliana. We raised you right." That first payment was $1,500, a substantial amount, but manageable with my new salary. I felt good about helping the people who had raised me, despite our complicated relationship. It seemed like the right thing to do, a way to show gratitude for the sacrifices they had made during my childhood. What I didn't realize was that this temporary arrangement would become permanent. After paying off their 3-month mortgage delinquency, I continued receiving calls about other urgent needs: property taxes, medical bills, car repairs. Each request came with assurances that it would be the last, that my father was close to finding something new, though these job prospects mysteriously never materialized. 6 months after his layoff, my father announced he was taking early retirement. "At my age, no one wants to hire me," he explained when I expressed concern. "Besides, your mother needs me at home with her condition." There was truth to this. My mother's arthritis had worsened, limiting her ability to work full-time. But their decision meant they would be living primarily on my father's modest pension and my mother's partial disability benefits. Nowhere near enough to maintain their lifestyle, let alone cover their mortgage. Without explicitly asking, it was clear they expected me to fill the financial gap indefinitely. And I did. I set up automatic monthly transfers for their mortgage and established an additional emergency fund they could access for unexpected expenses. When my mother's medication wasn't covered by insurance, I paid the $400 monthly cost out of pocket. When their refrigerator died, I bought a new one. When winter brought high heating bills, I covered those too. Throughout this period, Uncle Jim observed with growing concern. During one of our regular calls, he gently broached the subject. "Jules, you're doing a lot for your parents. Maybe too much. They need help," I replied defensively. "What am I supposed to do? Let them lose their house?" "Of course not," he said carefully. "But has Richard looked into part-time work or downsizing to something more manageable?" I admitted these options hadn't been discussed. When Uncle Jim suggested he could talk to my father about financial planning, I quickly declined. It would just hurt his pride. This works for now. What I didn't say was that helping my parents financially had created a shift in our relationship that I secretly enjoyed. For the first time in my life, my father spoke to me with something approaching respect. My mother bragged about me to her friends. After years of feeling like I wasn't quite good enough, I had finally found a way to earn their approval. The cost seemed worth it at the time. As my career continued to advance, I accepted a position with a major tech company in Chicago, nearly doubling my salary. The increased distance from my parents was balanced by my increased ability to support them. During occasional visits home, I noticed subtle changes. A new flat-screen TV, my father's expanded fishing gear, my mother's growing collection of department store clothing with tags still attached. When I asked about these purchases, they brushed off my concerns. "We found it on sale," or "It was a special occasion," they would say. I wanted to believe them to think they were being responsible with the support I provided. And truthfully, I was too busy building my career to investigate closely. During this time, my bond with Uncle Jim strengthened. He visited me in Chicago several times, genuinely interested in my life and career. Unlike my parents, who rarely asked about my work, except in terms of income, Uncle Jim wanted to understand what I actually did all day. He met my friends, remembered their names, and never once asked for financial assistance, despite going through a divorce that had strained his own resources. "I'm proud of you not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you are," he told me during one visit. "Never forget that your worth isn't tied to your wallet." If only I had truly internalized that message sooner, perhaps I could have avoided the pain that was coming. But by then, the pattern was firmly established. I had become my family's financial safety net, or as I would later discover, their cash cow. The signs of exploitation emerged gradually, like a photograph slowly developing. What began as assistance with essential needs expanded to include increasingly questionable expenses. 3 years into supporting my parents, I noticed the requests becoming more frequent and less urgent in nature. The watershed moment came when my father called about needing a small amount for a boat. I assumed he meant repairs to his old fishing boat, until he texted a picture of himself standing proudly next to a brand new 22-foot bass tracker with custom fishing seats. "Isn't she a beauty?" he wrote. "Got a great deal. Only need $7,000 to cover the difference after trade-in." I stared at my phone in disbelief. $7,000 wasn't a small amount by any standard, and a new boat was hardly a necessity. When I called to question the purchase, my father became defensive. "I've worked hard all my life," he said. "Don't I deserve to enjoy my retirement? Besides, I thought you'd be happy for me." The guilt trip worked. I transferred the money, while a small voice inside questioned why my father hadn't consulted me before making such a large purchase with funds he knew would come from me. Around the same time, my mother's shopping habits escalated from occasional splurges to regular sprees. Packages from online retailers arrived at their house daily. When I visited, I noticed her closet overflowing with clothes still bearing tags. Yet every month she called with concerns about covering basic utilities or medication. The nature of our communication changed as well. Family calls became transactional, opening with pleasantries, but quickly pivoting to financial needs. My father rarely asked about my life beyond vague questions about how work was going. My mother showed slightly more interest, but often interrupted stories about my achievements or challenges to mention a friend whose daughter had recently gotten married or had a baby, clear hints about her priorities for my life. At family gatherings, I was introduced to relatives or family friends with emphasis on my career success. "This is Juliana, our daughter who works for that big tech company in Chicago." My father would say, his tone suggesting my value lay in my professional status rather than personal qualities. After one holiday dinner, I overheard him telling his cousin, "She makes more than both of us ever did combined. We must have done something right." There was no mention of my work ethic, the nights I'd stayed up studying, or the sacrifices I'd made to reach my position. The financial burden began affecting my personal life in ways I hadn't anticipated. At 34, I still rented an apartment because I couldn't save enough for a down payment on a home while supporting two households. Vacations were rare luxuries, usually postponed to cover unexpected emergencies for my parents. Even small indulgences like dining out or buying new clothes came with a side of guilt, as I calculated what else that money could have covered. Dating became complicated. How do you explain to potential partners that a significant portion of your income goes to supporting capable adults who choose not to work? Several promising relationships ended when men realized the extent of my financial commitments and the family dynamics behind them. One boyfriend put it bluntly, "You're being used, Juliana, and you can't see it because they're your parents." I dismissed his concern as insensitivity, but the seed of doubt was planted. I began making tentative attempts to establish boundaries. During one call with my parents, I suggested creating a monthly budget for their expenses, rather than responding to sporadic requests. "That sounds so formal," my mother objected. "We're family, not a business arrangement." "It would help me plan better," I explained. "And maybe Dad could look for part-time work to supplement the pension." My father scoffed. "At my age, who would hire me? Besides, I need to be home for your mother." When I gently pointed out that his daily fishing trips suggested he had time available, my mother began to cry. "We've asked so little considering all we did raising you," she said between sobs. "If you're struggling financially, just say so. We'll make do somehow." The implication was clear. Any attempt to reduce support meant I was selfish and ungrateful. I backed down immediately, assuring them I was fine, just trying to be organized. The conversation ended with me increasing their monthly allowance to cover rising costs. After hanging up, I called Uncle Jim seeking perspective. "They make me feel like I'm abandoning them if I don't cover everything they want," I confessed. "There's a difference between supporting family and being taken advantage of," he replied carefully. "Have you considered talking to a therapist about this? Sometimes an outside perspective helps." I dismissed the suggestion, though it would prove prescient. "They're my parents. It's complicated." "Yes," he agreed, "but that doesn't make it right." As the months passed, the financial requests continued to escalate while my parents' gratitude diminished. What had once been met with profuse thanks became expected, then demanded. My father's tone when discussing money changed from appreciative to entitled. My mother's emotional manipulation grew more sophisticated, alternating between guilt trips about their sacrifices and glowing praise of my generosity when she wanted something specific. The cognitive dissonance was difficult to reconcile. These were the people who had raised me, who had worked hard to provide a stable, if modest, childhood. How could I refuse to help them in their retirement? Yet increasingly I felt less like a beloved daughter, and more like an investment that had finally paid off. Uncle Jim continued to express concern during our private conversations. "They haven't even looked at downsizing the house now that it's just the two of them," he noted. "And Richard bought a new truck last month." I hadn't known about the truck. My father hadn't mentioned it during our weekly calls, perhaps knowing it would raise questions about their financial priorities. The discovery left me feeling deceived, yet still torn about confronting them directly. "I don't want to damage our relationship," I told Uncle Jim. "They're still my parents." "The relationship is already damaged, Jules," he replied gently. "You just can't see it from your side yet." How prophetic his words would prove to be. Just 1 week later, the truth would be revealed in a way I could no longer ignore or rationalize away. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was working from home deep into coding a complex security protocol for a client when my phone buzzed with multiple text messages from my father. "Furnace making strange noises," the first one read. "Repairman says we need a new one. Can you send $4,200 today? Getting cold here." It was September in Ohio, hardly cold enough to necessitate immediate furnace replacement. Still, winter was coming, and they would need heat eventually. I responded that I'd transfer the money that evening after a client meeting. His reply was terse. Sooner is better, repairman waiting. Sighing, I put my work aside and made the transfer, immediately receiving only a thumbs up emoji in response. No thank you, no acknowledgement of the interruption to my workday. I pushed down my irritation and returned to my project working late to make up for the lost time. That evening, exhausted after a 10-hour workday, I poured a glass of wine and settled onto my couch to decompress. My phone chimed with a notification, a video message from Uncle Jim. This was unusual. We typically texted or called rather than sending videos. Curious, I pressed play. The video opened in what was clearly my parents' living room. The camera seemed to be positioned discreetly, as though Uncle Jim had set his phone down while still recording without others noticing. The frame captured several people seated around the coffee table: my parents, two of my aunts, and my father's friend from his factory days. They were drinking and laughing, the atmosphere festive, despite the supposedly urgent furnace situation from earlier that day. My father was showing off what appeared to be new golf clubs still in their packaging. Top of the line, he was saying, his speech slightly slurred from alcohol. Pro Shop had them on sale for only $900. My aunt whistled. Fancy retirement hobby you've got there, Richard. My father grinned, raising his glass in a mock toast. Well, when you've got a perfect little cash cow like Juliana, why not enjoy the finer things? The group laughed and my stomach clenched. Cash cow. I leaned closer to my phone screen, hoping I'd misheard. She's too busy with her important job to notice anyway. My mother added, her tone conspiratorial. Last month, I told her I needed money for my arthritis medication, and she didn't even ask questions. Bought this bracelet the next day. She extended her wrist to display what looked like an expensive gold bangle. My father snorted. Remember when she suggested I get a part-time job, as if I'd waste my golden years working when she makes enough for all of us? My aunt chimed in. You two hit the jackpot with that one. My kids barely call, let alone pay my bills. The camera shifted slightly, and Uncle Jim's voice came from behind it, his tone notably cooler than the others. She works incredibly hard for that money, 60-hour weeks sometimes. My father waved his hand dismissively. And we worked hard raising her, didn't we? Now it's payback time. Payback? Uncle Jim sounded incredulous. You make it sound like she owes you for being born. Well, doesn't she? My father shot back. 22 years of food, clothing, shelter, college tuition help. That adds up. You didn't pay her college tuition, Uncle Jim corrected. She had scholarships and worked 3 jobs. My mother interjected, her voice soothing, but her words cutting. The point is, we're her parents. Supporting family is what you do. Juliana understands that even if you don't, Jim. My father nodded emphatically. Exactly. Besides, what else is she spending it on? No husband, no kids. At least this way her money's going to good use. He picked up one of the golf clubs, admiring it. To Juliana, he said, raising it like a glass for a toast. Worthless except for her bank account, but that's worth plenty. The group laughed again. All except Uncle Jim, whose hand suddenly moved into frame to grab his phone. The video shook as he picked it up, accidentally capturing his face for a moment, his expression a mixture of disgust and anger. Before the recording abruptly ended, I sat frozen, my wine glass halfway to my lips, the world tilting on its axis. Worthless, except for her bank account. The words echoed in my head, spoken in my father's voice, accompanied by the sound of my mother's laughter. The people who should have valued me most saw me as nothing but a financial resource. My phone immediately rang. Uncle Jim calling. I declined the call, needing time to process what I'd just witnessed. He texted immediately. Jules, I'm so sorry. That was meant for Sarah. I was documenting their behavior to show my wife. I never meant for you to see it. Please call me. I turned off my phone, set down my untouched wine, and walked to the bathroom, where I promptly vomited. The physical reaction mirrored my emotional state: disgust, shock, violation. Years of sacrifice and support rewarded with mockery and contempt. After washing my face with trembling hands, I returned to the living room and replayed the video 3 more times, forcing myself to absorb every painful detail. The casual cruelty, the entitlement, the clear pattern of deception. Around midnight, I finally called my best friend Sarah, who lived in the same building. She arrived at my door within minutes, still in her pajamas, and held me while I sobbed. I've been paying their mortgage for 5 years, I choked out. I've given them over $300,000, and they think I'm worthless. You're not confronting them tonight, Sarah said firmly, taking my phone when I reached for it. You need to think this through when you're calmer. She stayed over sleeping on my couch after making me promise not to contact my parents until morning. But sleep was impossible. I lay awake replaying not just the video, but years of interactions, seeing them now through a new lens. The pattern of exploitation was so clear, I couldn't believe I'd missed it. Or perhaps I hadn't missed it at all, but had willfully ignored it, desperate for the approval I'd never truly received. By dawn, shock had hardened into resolve. I wouldn't react emotionally or impulsively. Instead, I would do what I did best, as an engineer, analyze the problem thoroughly and develop a strategic solution. My parents had been playing a long game. Now, it was my turn. The next morning, Uncle Jim called again while I was making coffee. This time I answered his voice, immediately pouring out in a rush of apologies. Jules, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to see that. I was documenting their behavior because Sarah didn't believe how bad it had gotten. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice steady despite my lack of sleep. He hesitated. The comments about money years. But it's gotten worse recently. They don't even try to hide it when you're not around. Why didn't you tell me? I tried in my way, he said quietly. I've been hinting about their spending, suggesting you set boundaries. But I didn't want to come between you and your parents. Family is complicated. Not anymore, I replied. Now it's very simple. What are you going to do? His tone was concerned, but not judgmental. Nothing. Yet. I explained my decision to observe and plan rather than confront them immediately. I need to understand the full extent of this before I act. That's probably wise, he agreed. Just know I'm here for you, whatever you decide. After our call, I took a personal day from work, my first in 3 years, and began a methodical investigation into my financial support of my parents. I downloaded bank statements, created spreadsheets, and cataloged every transfer check and direct payment I'd made on their behalf since beginning this arrangement. The total was staggering, $347, $652, over 5 years. Beyond the mortgage payments, there were utilities, insurance premiums, property taxes, medical bills, car payments, and countless emergency expenses. What had started as temporary assistance had ballooned into full financial dependence, or rather, exploitation. Next, I searched my parents' social media accounts, something I rarely did since we communicated directly. My mother's Facebook page revealed photos of shopping trips, restaurant meals, and a cruise to Alaska they had taken last spring. A cruise they had never mentioned during the same month they had called asking for help with unexpected medical expenses. My father's fishing buddy had tagged him in photos of their regular charter boat trips on Lake Erie, expensive outings he had similarly never disclosed. Their financial priorities were laid bare through these posts: luxury purchases, hobbies, and travel, all while claiming they struggled to meet basic needs. Armed with this information, I scheduled appointments with both a financial advisor and a therapist specializing in family dynamics. The financial advisor helped me understand that my voluntary support created no legal obligation to continue, and suggested a gradual withdrawal strategy that wouldn't leave my parents destitute, but would require them to adjust their lifestyle. The therapist helped me process my feelings of betrayal and examine the unhealthy patterns in our relationship. You've been seeking approval through financial support, she observed during our first session, but genuine love and respect can't be purchased. I know that now. I said, the truth of it settling in my bones. I just never thought my own parents would see me as nothing but a paycheck. People who exploit others often justify it through entitlement, she explained. Your parents feel entitled to your success because they see it as an extension of themselves, not the result of your hard work and talent. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained normal contact with my parents, responding to texts and participating in our weekly Sunday calls. I neither confronted them about the video nor mentioned any changes to our financial arrangement. Instead, I listened with new awareness as my mother complained about rising grocery prices, and my father mentioned wanting to upgrade his fishing equipment. We'll figure something out, I said noncommittally when they hinted at needing additional funds. Their assumption that I would eventually send money was palpable. Meanwhile, I consulted with Uncle Jim, who became my ally in planning next steps. They won't take this well, he warned. Your father especially has a temper when he doesn't get his way. I know, I replied. That's why I'm preparing carefully. I also reconnected with friends I had neglected while focusing on my career and family obligations. Sarah organized a small dinner party to introduce me to people in her social circle, including a kind architect named David, who asked for my number. For the first time in years, I considered the possibility of dating without worrying about explaining my complicated financial entanglements. 3 weeks after receiving the video, I had developed a comprehensive exit strategy. I would provide a 3-month transition period, with gradually reducing financial support, after which I would continue paying only half their mortgage for 6 additional months while they adjusted their budget. I created a detailed financial plan, showing how they could live comfortably on their pension and Social Security if they downsized and managed their spending responsibly. I was prepared to implement this plan gradually until a call from my father forced my timeline. Juliana, he said without preamble when I answered. I'm looking at a new car. The Lexus dealer has a great lease option, but they need a larger down payment than expected. Can you transfer $12,000 today? The casualness of the request, not asking if I could help but simply expecting immediate compliance, crystallized everything. That's a lot on short notice, Dad. What happened to your current car? It's 5 years old, he replied, as though that explained everything. The lease is up. I thought you'd be happy for me. I just sent you money for the furnace, and now you need a luxury car. His tone shifted instantly from pleasant to cold. I didn't realize I needed to justify my decisions to my daughter. After everything we've done for you, this is how you talk to me. What exactly have you done for me lately, Dad? The words escaped before I could stop them, the dam finally breaking. Excuse me, we raised you. We gave you everything. And now you think that entitles you to everything I earn to call me your cash cow behind my back. There was a moment of stunned silence before he responded, his voice suddenly wary. What are you talking about? I think you know. I've seen the video, Dad. I heard what you said about me being worthless except for my bank account. Another pause longer this time. Then, Jim had no right to show you that. We were just joking around. No denial, no apology, just anger at being caught. I'll be at your house this Saturday at 2, I said, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. We need to talk about our arrangement going forward. Please make sure Mom is there too. Now wait a minute, he blustered, but I had already ended the call. Within minutes, my phone exploded with texts and calls from both parents. I silenced it, focusing instead on finalizing my plans. The confrontation would happen on my terms, not in response to their panic. That evening, I called Uncle Jim. It's happening Saturday, I told him. Would you be there? I could use the support. Of course, he said without hesitation. You're doing the right thing, Jules. It won't be easy, but it's necessary. I know, I replied, feeling strangely calm. After years of anxiety about pleasing my parents, the clarity of purpose was almost liberating. It's time they met the daughter they created, the one who finally learned her true worth. Saturday arrived clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day that belied the emotional storm brewing. I dressed carefully in a professional gray suit, my negotiation outfit from work, and drove the 3 hours to my parents' house with a portfolio of financial documents, my laptop, and a small portable projector. Uncle Jim was already there when I arrived, having come early to ensure my parents didn't cancel the meeting. He met me in the driveway, his expression supportive but concerned. They've been arguing all morning, he said quietly. Your mother's been crying, and your father is alternating between anger and attempts to strategize how to handle you. I nodded unsurprised. Let's get this over with. Inside, the tension was palpable. My mother sat rigid on the sofa, eyes red-rimmed, but makeup carefully applied. My father stood by the fireplace, arms crossed defensively across his chest. Neither moved to hug me when I entered, a first in our family's history regardless of conflicts. Juliana, my father began, his tone conciliatory but strained. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Whatever Jim showed you was taken out of context. Let's not start with lies, I replied calmly, setting up my laptop on the coffee table. I saw the entire video. Nothing was out of context. "We were just joking around," my mother interjected, her voice pleading. "You know how people exaggerate when they've been drinking." In vino veritas, Mom. But this isn't about one video. It's about a pattern that's been going on for years. While they exchanged nervous glances, I connected my laptop to the projector I'd brought, displaying my spreadsheet on the living room wall. The same wall where family photos chronicled decades of shared history. Over the past 5 years, I began in the same professional tone I use for client presentations. I have provided you with $347,652.83 in financial support. The number hung in the air between us, its magnitude undeniable. My father shifted uncomfortably while my mother's hand flew to her mouth. "This includes your mortgage payments, utilities, property taxes, car payments, and numerous emergencies that seem to coincide with luxury purchases." I clicked to the next slide, screenshots from their social media, showing the Alaska cruise, new golf clubs, my mother's jewelry, and my father's fishing expeditions. "You claimed you needed money for medical expenses the same month you took this cruise," I stated, pointing to the image. "You said the furnace was breaking down urgently this week, but somehow had money for new golf clubs." "We can explain," my mother began, but I continued my presentation without pausing. "I've prepared a transition plan." I handed them each a printed document outlining my proposal. "For the next 3 months, I'll reduce support by 25% each month. After that, I'll pay half your mortgage for 6 additional months while you adjust your budget or downsize." My father's face darkened as he scanned the document. "This is ridiculous. You can't just cut us off like this." "I'm not cutting you off. I'm expecting you to live within your means like other adults. You have income from your pension and Social Security. The financial advisor I consulted says it's more than adequate if you budget properly." "Financial advisor?" My father's voice rose. "You discussed our private business with a stranger." "Yes, just like you discussed me being your cash cow with the entire family." My mother began to cry in earnest now. "After everything we sacrificed for you." "What exactly did you sacrifice, Mom? I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. I built my career through 70-hour weeks. I postponed buying a home, taking vacations, even dating because every spare dollar went to you." Uncle Jim, who had remained silent until now, spoke quietly from his position near the door. "Richard, Marie, she's right. You've been taking advantage of her generosity. It needs to stop." My father turned on him furiously. "This is your fault. You and your damn video." "The video just revealed what was already happening," I interjected. "If you hadn't been exploiting me, there would have been nothing to record." "Exploiting," my father spat the word. "We're your parents. You owe us." "For what? For calling me worthless, for laughing about how you trick me into giving you money, for treating me like an ATM instead of a daughter." The raw pain in my voice seemed to penetrate my mother's defenses. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. My father, however, doubled down. "If you do this, don't expect to remain part of this family," he threatened, his face flushed with anger. The statement hung in the air, intended to terrify me into compliance, as it had so many times before. But instead of fear, I felt an odd sense of calm. "That's your choice, Dad. But understand what you're saying. You're threatening to disown your daughter unless she continues to fund your lifestyle. Does that sound like love to you?" He had no answer. For perhaps the first time in my life, I'd rendered my father speechless. "The plan starts today," I continued, my voice steady. "I've already updated the automatic transfers to reflect the new amounts. The documents explain everything, including suggestions for reducing your expenses." I stood, gathering my laptop and projector. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because this relationship has become unhealthy for all of us. You've come to see me as a resource rather than a person, and I've been enabling that dynamic." My mother finally spoke, her voice small. "What if we need help with something important, a real emergency? Then you call me and we discuss it like adults, with transparency and respect." I met her gaze directly. "But understand that my support will never again be unconditional or unlimited." I moved toward the door, physically and emotionally exhausted, despite the relatively short confrontation. Uncle Jim placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "I hope someday we can build a healthier relationship," I said, turning back to my parents one last time. "One based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. But that's up to you now." My father remained silent, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. My mother nodded slightly, tears streaming down her face. Whether from genuine remorse or manipulative habit, I couldn't tell anymore. As Uncle Jim and I walked to our cars, he squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Jules. That took incredible courage." "Thank you," I replied, feeling both drained and somehow lighter. "For everything, especially for sending that video, even if it was accidental." He smiled sadly. "Sometimes we need to see the truth, even when it hurts." Driving away from my childhood home, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the loving family I had never truly had, anger at years of exploitation, but also hope for the future I could now build on my own terms. The hardest step wasn't confronting my parents. It was accepting that they might never be the people I had needed them to be. But for the first time in years, I was driving toward my own life rather than funding someone else's. And despite the pain that felt remarkably like freedom, 1 year after the confrontation in my parents' living room, I sat on the balcony of my newly purchased condo in downtown Chicago, watching the sunset paint the skyline in shades of gold and pink. The journey to this moment of peace had been neither quick nor easy, but each step had strengthened my sense of self-worth in ways I never could have imagined. The first month after implementing my exit plan had been the hardest. My phone had buzzed constantly with messages from my parents, ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas. My father had called me selfish and ungrateful. My mother had claimed they would lose their house and be homeless. I maintained the boundaries I had established, responding factually to legitimate questions about the transition plan, but refusing to engage with emotional manipulation. 2 months and the tone of communication shifted. My father found part-time work as a consultant for a small manufacturing business, a position he had previously dismissed as beneath him. My mother sold much of her unused clothing and jewelry online, generating unexpected income. These steps weren't taken graciously. They made sure I knew they were forced into these measures, but they were steps nonetheless. By the 4-month mark, they had met with a realtor to discuss downsizing options. The 4-bedroom house where I'd grown up was far more than 2 people needed, and the maintenance costs were substantial. They eventually sold it for a good price in a seller's market and purchased a 2-bedroom condo in a 55-plus community with lower property taxes and included maintenance. Throughout this period, I maintained my promised support, transferring the agreed-upon amounts punctually, but no more. When my father's car needed unexpected repairs, I asked for documentation and paid the mechanic directly, rather than sending them cash. When my mother required a medical procedure not fully covered by insurance, I reviewed the bills before covering the difference. Trust would need to be rebuilt gradually, if at all. Uncle Jim remained my strongest ally, keeping me informed about family dynamics when I needed space from direct contact. He reported that while my parents complained bitterly about their ungrateful daughter to some relatives, others had begun to question why 2 able-bodied adults in their early 60s had been financially dependent on their child in the first place. On a personal level, the changes were equally significant. Without the financial burden of supporting my parents, I was able to save for my own future. I worked with my therapist to address the deep-seated need for approval that had made me vulnerable to exploitation, and to establish healthier boundaries in all relationships. I reconnected with friends and began dating without the shadow of my family obligations. The architect I had met at Sarah's dinner party, David, became a significant presence in my life, someone who valued me for my character rather than what I could provide materially. Professional opportunities expanded as well. Freed from the need to maximize income at all costs, I could consider positions based on interest and growth potential, rather than solely on salary. I accepted a role with a smaller tech company developing educational software, finding profound satisfaction in creating tools that would help students like my younger self access learning opportunities. 6 months after our confrontation, I received a letter from my mother, an actual handwritten letter rather than a text or email. In it, she acknowledged for the first time that they had taken advantage of my generosity and expressed what seemed like genuine remorse. "We got caught up in what you could give us," she wrote, "and forgot to see who you are. I'm sorry for that more than I can say." The letter included no request for money or assistance, just an open invitation to call when I felt ready. It took me another month to make that call, and the conversation was awkward but civil. We talked about her arthritis, my new job, the weather, safe topics that carefully avoided the financial elephant that had dominated our relationship for years. 2 more months passed before I agreed to meet them for lunch at a restaurant, neutral territory where we could exit if things became uncomfortable. My father was notably subdued, his usual domineering presence diminished by the reality check of having to manage his own finances again. He offered a stiff apology that felt rehearsed, but was nevertheless more than I had expected. "I didn't raise you to be a doormat," he said gruffly. "I should have been proud when you finally stood up to me." It wasn't exactly warm, but it was honest. Perhaps the most honest he had ever been with me. Progress came in small increments. A birthday card with no hints about gifts or money. A phone call that focused on my achievements rather than their needs, genuine interest in my relationship with David. The healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks and uncomfortable moments, like when my father slipped and referred to something as too expensive while looking at me expectantly. But I no longer felt responsible for solving their problems, and they gradually stopped expecting me to. Now, a year later, we had reached a cautious détente. We spoke weekly, met monthly, and were relearning how to relate to each other as adults rather than as provider and dependents. The damage would never fully disappear. Some betrayals cut too deep for complete healing. But we were building something new from the ashes of our former dysfunctional dynamic. The most profound change, however, was within myself. The woman who had desperately sought approval through financial support had been replaced by someone who understood her inherent worth wasn't tied to her utility to others. I had learned to value myself not for what I could provide, but for who I was, a lesson that had come at a high cost, but was perhaps worth the price. My phone chimed with a text from Uncle Jim. "Happy 1 year anniversary of your Independence Day. Proud of you, Jules." I smiled, typing back. "Couldn't have done it without you. Dinner next week." As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the Chicago skyline, I reflected on how accidental revelations sometimes provide the clarity we need most. That video had been painful beyond measure, but it had also been the catalyst for reclaiming my life. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision about a family relationship that was hurting you? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most, but they're often the most necessary. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, your worth isn't determined by what you can give others. It's inherent in who you are. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength in your own.